Anastasia was back in her room, listening to Peter Motinda. I think I actually know what you are trying to say. You do? Yes, it's a bit like something my friend Peter Motinda told me earlier today. That is a notable coincidence. Perhaps not a coincidence at all. But Dr. Soleil, what does that have to do with zombies and ghosts? Well, this redemptive story, it's the underlying truth to our existence in the universe. But when the soul forgets it, it wanders as a ghost, and ghosts end up in dangerous places. I'm speculating a bit now, but my theory is that, for some reason, the dead of our country have become ghosts, and they are getting lost. I think they are in limbo. Limbo? Yes, it's a sort of wasteland, and the longer they stay there, the more they forget. If they forget too much, they will never be able to return here or go forward to whatever vision of the afterlife they expect. But why are they forgetting? Latia frowned and shook her head. That I don't know. It could be black magic, but I'm still trying to figure it out. I had my team helping me, but I sent them home to check on their families. I couldn't justify keeping them here. Anastasia rubbed her temples. She had a bit of a headache from all the information she was trying to process. If there were zombies and ghosts, she guessed she could accept there was such a thing as black magic, too. So what do we do? Someone has to go into limbo. Someone who can lead the ghosts back to the path where they can remember their stories. The path? Think of it as the main highway of the afterlife. It branches in a lot of different directions to different afterlives. One of those branches, a dead-end one, is limbo. I don't quite see the connection. Stories are not truth, they are made up. Latia raised a finger. That is not as clear-cut as you think. There might be more fact in fiction than not. The best stories, the timeless ones, they are like pulling a single thread, and as you pull, that thread grows thicker, turning into a string. You keep pulling, the next thing you know, you are hauling in a rope. The rope becomes a cable, then the cable a chain, and it turns out the chain connects to the rest of the universe. Supernovae, ghosts, heaven, death, strings, chains, the universe. Anastasia shook her head as if clearing it after a sneeze. I know it's a lot to take in, Latia said, leaning back now, her hands folded on her lap. Anastasia tried to shrink the spinning world down to something manageable. She reminded herself why she had come in the first place, remembering the series of events, her failure, her brother's worsening condition. I just want to help Paolo get better. She swallowed a lump in her throat. What do I have to do to help? Are you sure you want to help? Anastasia pictured her brother, his skin shading to blue-gray, the color in his bright brown eyes fading, the sad, drawn faces of her grandmother, her aunties, the tears on her parents' faces. Yes. Latia got up and stepped over to her desk, where she had set the flask from the lab. She turned its top, and it opened with a click and a hiss. The liquid she poured out of it into a graduated cylinder was a light purple. Anastasia thought she might have caught the scent it gave off from where she sat, but she had never encountered a liquid with such a strong scent of sea breeze. It brought to mind vacations to the coast with her family, when her grandparents were still living and all 3 generations of her family could interact. Latia stirred the liquid in the beaker with a glass rod, looking over to Anastasia with a smile. What do you smell? It's like the sea, when my whole family would go to the beach. I was so happy then. I smell laundry. Laundry? Clean laundry, that is. Latia smiled. It's one of my earliest memories. Looking up into the lines of linen just as my mother was hanging the wash out to dry in the sun. I was on her back. I could feel the vibration of her voice inside me while she sang. I was against her warm, breathing body, close enough to touch her face. Latia stood, holding the beaker and taking a deep breath over it through her nose, her eyes closed. Anastasia was surprised to see a tear form at the corner of her eye. Do you miss your mother? I do. She died when I was very young, and my father, he sent me away. I was raised by teachers and mentors. He said it was so I could be successful and educated, which is what happened. But I also know it was because, well, even then I looked like my mother, and I think it broke my father's heart to be reminded of her. I'm sorry, but how can I smell one thing and you another? Latia wiped her eye, her scholar's face returning. It's the nature of Imperium. It took my team and me years to determine the exact molecular composition of it from herbalists, shamans, medicine women. Then our chemists, physicians, and pharmacists had to reverse engineer it. We found it never smells the same to two people. Here, you will want to lie down. Latia lifted the cylinder as if making a toast towards the window. They crossed the room to where a leather sofa, the kind you might find in a psychologist's office, was waiting. It was big for Anastasia, her feet barely reaching halfway down its length once she settled into its arm. Latia held the beaker out to her. You have to drink this. I was afraid you would say that. Latia offered a sympathetic smile. Something about her expression, the kindness and wisdom behind it, soothed Anastasia's nerves. She took the beaker. What does it taste like? Anastasia asked, looking down into the Imperium. It was thick and opaque, with a surface that reflected light with an almost metallic quality. It's actually indescribable, Latia said, pulling over a cart full of medical monitoring equipment. What will happen after I drink it? The cart had a laptop, a CPU, as well as a display screen. A box with dials on it connected all the hardware. The box had an array of electrodes running out of it, each ending in a soft pad. Latia handled the equipment with the familiarity of a trained technician. She used some alcohol wipes to prep the skin around Anastasia's temples before sticking the pads there. A series of flat lines on the display screen began to dance in waves and troughs. Another pad went over her heart. Next, Latia brought over a blood pressure cuff and took a reading. You'll fall asleep. It will be like dreaming, Latia explained, checking the readout of the machine and adjusting the pads on Anastasia. As for limbo, I'm not sure what it will look like, but you should find all the ghosts of the zombies there, including your brother. You will have to speak to them and try to bring them back to the path. My hypothesis is that once there, they should remember and go on to where they need to go. The runners should return to their bodies and the shamblers to the afterlife. But don't stay too long because you'll forget your own story. Okay, seems simple enough. Yes, Latia said, pausing, a shadow of worry moving across her face. You are brave, Anastasia. I don't know what else you will see there or who, but I can warn you that there is one terrible demon that is supposed to be able to come and go at will in limbo. A demon? He doesn't even have a true name. He, she, whatever, is the spirit of death, destruction, chaos. Some think of him as a trickster, Ashu, Legba, Alegwa. In some traditions, he is a coyote, others a fox. In stories, he appears as a raven, a spider, or a rabbit. Some say he's really benign like Prometheus, or malevolent like Satan, or something in between like Kali. And if I see him? Latia pierced her with a glare. Run! Anastasia swallowed another painful lump in her throat. She looked into the Imperium. All right, I guess it's best to just get this over with. Hold on, let me check your baseline. Latia tapped a few keys on the laptop, while Anastasia continued to stare into the mysterious substance. It looked to be still and moving at once. She was not sure if it reflected the light, let light shine through, or was actually glowing. All too soon, Latia said. Ready? Anastasia tipped the glass back, poured past her lips, and swallowed. The Imperium had the consistency of warm honey. The taste as it bloomed in her mouth was something she could best describe as purple and cerulean. It was warm as sunlight, but after she swallowed, the finish in her mouth and nose was cold as wind passing through the emptiness of space. You're right, she said to Latia, a little overwhelmed by the sense of harmony and discord at once. It is indescribable. I know. Anastasia stared up at the ceiling, but her eyes darted back to Latia. I don't feel very sleepy. That is because there is one more ingredient, Latia said, turning the screen aside and pulling her chair close. What is it? A story, of course, Latia said, her hands pressed together between her knees. Of course, a story, sure. But, which story? That is the fun part. Any story you get to choose. Like a bedtime story? This doesn't seem too scientific, Anastasia said. Do zombies, ghosts, and magic potions seem scientific? Well, no, but you did hook me up to a heart monitor, and you are wearing a lab coat. Touché, Latia winked. But we have to hold space for all these things, all these lenses. And like I said, the root of this predicament is one of story. The story with its beginning, middle, and end is the smallest unit of truth. Your story, my story, your brother's story. There is a sort of magic to them, especially the variant of the bedtime story. Doesn't matter which, just as long as I send you off with one. You're the doctor, Anastasia said, trying to settle back into the cushions of the couch. Her eyes fell on the far wall and the series of pictures of Latia and her friend opening the schools. Who is that young man in the dashiki next to you in all the pictures? How did you two meet? Oh. Latia turned to the pictures. With one hand, she fumbled with the lapel over her breast, pressing it down. With the other, she rolled a stray braid back behind her ear. That is the story you want to hear? If Anastasia didn't know better, she would have said the poised, accomplished, and accredited scholar doctor was flustered. Had Latia's complexion been lighter, she might have blushed. Is he your boyfriend? Anastasia asked, surprising herself with her own brazenness. Oh, Jamhuri, Dr. Jamari, he is an old childhood friend. You all look happy together. Well, we founded some schools back in our village. You all must work well together, Anastasia probed. She was not usually so insistent. She wondered if the Imperium was loosening her inhibitions, like when she was extremely tired or how adults became when drinking wine. Her head did feel a little light, as if she were sleepy. Do you see him a lot still? Not enough, Latia said, turning back to the display, her pen in her teeth. We're both so busy. He runs the school and me with the institute. So how did you meet? Anastasia was definitely feeling groggy, and she didn't want to fall asleep without hearing the story and cause things to go wrong. Well, Latia said, removing the pen from her teeth and pushing her glasses up off her face so they perched on the top of her head. Anastasia could see that without them, Latia was exceedingly beautiful. Like I said, my mother had passed away, and my father had sent me away to learn where no one would reach me, a tree of all places. Anastasia listened, her consciousness slowly drifting as the story unfolded, shifting seamlessly between folktale and fact. She followed the twists and turns as best she could, fading as she was. Latia painted a picture of a tree that reached so high into the heavens that it had a dusting of snow on its branches and a brash young man determined to reach the top by any means he could. Talking monkeys, angry hippos, flocks of flamingos, and prayers to the gods mingled in Anastasia's mind, like fleeting visions of a long-lost memory, before she dropped off into a deep sleep. Before she opened her eyes, Anastasia heard a light plink, 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 plonk. It was a soft sound, something like water dripping and splashing, but somehow different by the slightest degree. She listened a bit longer. She felt as if she were in bed, just waking up on a Saturday morning. There was no hurry to rise. Plink, 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 plonk. Plink, 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 plonk. Sometimes the sound came in a series of 4, sometimes 5. The intervals diminished between each successive plink. At one point, when it came in a series of 7, she heard a girl's voice say, "Yes!" as if exclaiming to herself. Realizing that she was no longer in Latia's office, Anastasia opened her eyes and sat up. She rose from a pool of liquid. It was clear as distilled water, not cold, not hot. Rather, it felt the same temperature as her skin, so that it almost felt like nothing at all. Anastasia didn't seem to be wet from it either. The only way she could even tell it was there was by how the light glimmered on its surface, and how her own body beneath was distorted and wavered as it would if underwater. She felt a resistance as she drew her fingers through it. The viscosity was somewhat less than water. As she tried to cup it in her hand, it evaporated, only leaving the faintest traces to trickle between her fingers and dimple the surface below. Plink, 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 plonk. Anastasia turned her head to the source of the noise. The spot she was in was actually a shallow pool off to the side in a whole stream of the mysterious liquid. On a bank jutting out into the wider body of the stream, standing amid silvery blades of grass, was a girl about Anastasia's own age, skipping stones. Anastasia immediately recognized her and gasped. Esmeralda turned at the sound. She was wearing her green skirt and orange body wrap with a sash and head wrap in a complementary shade of green. Her staff was on the ground next to her, the long grass blades folded beneath it. Her eyes shone, in turns shades of gold, amber, and green, and she was looking at Anastasia. "Anastasia? Hi! Esmeralda? You can see?" Esmeralda shrugged. "Sure. But how did you recognize me?" "It's the spirit world. Who knows how anything works?" "But what are you doing here?" Esmeralda shrugged again, as if meeting Anastasia here was the most ordinary of things. She skipped another stone. Plink, 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 plonk. The sky was full of silvery clouds, the light diffuse. Anastasia wasn't sure where it was coming from. "When I dream, I come here," Esmeralda said. "And you can see here?" Anastasia asked, looking into those disconcerting eyes of shifting hues. "Oh, yeah, of course." "Where are we?" Esmeralda looked around at the clouds overhead, the river meandering past them as if the question had never really occurred to her. "I don't know. Where are any of us when we dream? Can I help you up?" she said after skipping a final stone out across the river. Sure." As Esmeralda pulled Anastasia up to the bank, more details of the space materialized. A gravelly shore of perfectly smooth black stones was underfoot. Further pools stretched in both directions as banks on either side of them traced serpentine paths beneath liquid and land. "What is this stuff?" Anastasia asked, scooping the liquid in her fingers only to watch it disappear again. "It's ether," Esmeralda said, "just like the clouds in the air here." "Ether? How do you know?" "I'm not sure," she said, looking up and down the length of the stream. "How does anyone know anything in a dream?" Anastasia was detecting a theme. "But I don't think I'm dreaming. I drank a potion at Dr. Soleil's Research Institute. I'm supposed to try to bring Paolo back." "Oh, yeah, I'm remembering now," Esmeralda said, her eyes widening. "You went missing from the house. You snuck out, you cheeky girl, you. Your parents are worried." "They are?" "Oh, yeah, they're wrecks. They realized you were missing this afternoon. I'd been up all night standing guard outside Paolo's room, and Peter had just relieved me. I would have helped search for you, but Peter insisted I rest. So I went to my room and fell asleep. That's when I came here." Anastasia felt a wave of guilt that she had caused her parents more anguish. But if it was necessary to save Paolo, she knew it had to be done. "So I'm in your dream?" Anastasia asked, looking around. "Not exactly. Like I said, I come here when I dream, but it's not my dream, it's a place." "A place?" "Sort of. I guess you wouldn't have been here before, as a seer." "A seer?" "A sighted person. When you see and take it for granted, you miss a great deal. Peter has helped me understand that one of the gifts of being blind is to see the spirit world and travel into it when my body's resting. We are in part of it now." Anastasia felt a strange sort of shame and jealousy. Did everyone know more about the world than she? How could she have missed so much? "The spirit world is huge," Esmeralda continued. "Much bigger than our own and full of things you'd never imagine, and some things you might. It's where heavens and hells and all sorts of afterlives and before lives reside." "Then I think I'm in the right place. I am supposed to find limbo." "Huh. Well, that is interesting, because we're right there." "This place, this stream?" "Well, not exactly. This stream is the center of things. It's time and it flows in one direction. That flow is called the path." "Oh, I'm supposed to find that too." "Makes sense. The path is the center of things. You can travel up or down it or off to the worlds and times to either side. This bank here does really lead to limbo. Maybe I'm here to lead you." "Is that how things work here?" Esmeralda shrugged once more. "As much as anything works here, it's different." "I'm gathering as much. Dr. Soleil, Latia, she's a sort of scientist, doctor, medicine woman, and she said that zombies are a result of spirits forgetting their stories, leading them to become ghosts, and then they wander into limbo and get stuck and need to be let out. If we lead them out, then the zombie problem will be fixed." "Yeah? It doesn't sound like a bad theory." "Well, she called it a hypothesis. I guess I'm supposed to test it," Anastasia said, reaching for the terminology from her science classes and glad she could remember it. It kept her from feeling completely stupid, since it seemed like everyone else knew more than she did. "Well, then, let's go," Esmeralda said, bending to pick up her walking staff. Here it was transformed, longer than it was in real life and sturdier. It was carved from yellow yew wood. Esmeralda started into the mists of ether, Anastasia following. As she did, something strange happened. The ground shifted. Anastasia's sense of up and down and the horizon shifted. She had to steady herself on her feet to keep from falling over. Esmeralda spun around, looked at her, and reached out to catch her. She would have to get used to Esmeralda being able to do that. Esmeralda held her arm in a firm, reassuring grip. "Sorry, I forgot about that." "What happened?" "Things. Perspectives shift here when you enter a different space." Esmeralda nodded backwards. Anastasia followed her gaze and experienced a second wave of disorientation and vertigo. The stream, or path, had shifted as they had moved. Now, instead of flowing like a river, the stream moved upwards now, like smoke from an offering fire. Oriented so, Anastasia could sense how it had flowed up, out of the deep well of time, the past a land below them, the future ascendant. "This is so strange," Anastasia said. "This is just the beginning," Esmeralda said, helping to steady her. "Come on." They walked for what felt like a few hours, but time was hard to measure in the spirit plane. There was no sense of fatigue and no bodily reminders like hunger or thirst that signaled a passage of time or the waxing or waning of energy. And on the one hand, it felt as if they had just arrived. But Anastasia knew they had been walking for a while. It was much like the way time was compressed in a movie, jumping from one scene to the next, knowing an interval had passed without clear memory of having experienced it. As they walked, the land became somewhat more substantial. The ground was rocky and dusty, a bit like pictures Anastasia had seen of Mars, but the regolith here was dull brownish gray, a sort of beige lacking any distinct coloring at all. The landscape was featureless too, with no trees, shrubs, bushes, or any sign of growing things. And although the close curtains of ether had cleared, banks of it still hung just a few meters to all sides, so that their field of view was short. Even the sky pressed close, gray-white, a solid, opaque lid. When they came to a modest-sized ridge, Anastasia was exceedingly grateful for the small break in the monotony, even if it meant they would have to climb. Anastasia had known they'd been walking and talking a long while, because in that time, she had learned all about Esmeralda's life and how her family had struggled to cope with her blindness. Anastasia realized their world was one built disproportionately on sight, and that it was hard to navigate for those with visual impairments or special needs. "I don't even like either of those terms, impaired or special needs. I just call myself special," Esmeralda said. Anastasia stopped herself short of saying, "I see," instead choosing to say, "I understand." Esmeralda shared how she had first met Peter and how his training had transformed her life. She explained that she had learned to experience the world through other senses and discovered things hidden to seers. As Anastasia listened, she regretted never having asked Esmeralda more about her life before, for the way she described her world of sounds, scents, textures, and tastes made Anastasia appreciate the world in a new way. "It almost sounds as if you don't regret being blind," Anastasia offered as they began to climb. "No, I don't. I'm used to it now." Peter helped me see how my disability was actually a strength, my hurt an invitation to learn gratitude and heal. Oh, wow, Anastasia said, Esmeralda's words resonating with things Peter and even Latia had shared with her not long before. So one of the benefits is that when you dream, you come here? Apparently. And you've been to this place, Limbo, before? Yes, but not a lot. It's not a safe place. Peter has warned me of it. If you stay too long, you forget the way back. It's kind of a sad place, too. The people you meet there have lost their memories. Nothing ever gets finished. Esmeralda paused for a moment before adding, It's also dangerous because this is one of the realms where the Unnamed One is known to stalk. The Unnamed One, Anastasia said, something Latia had said resurfacing in her memory with a sinking sense of dread. Yeah, sounds cryptic, I know, Esmeralda said in an apologetic tone. But the Unnamed One is sort of his name. What is he? A demon, a devil, a blight, a devourer of souls? I'm not sure exactly. I just know Peter tells me to go the other way and fast if I ever see him. Do you know what he looks like? Never seen him, but I imagine him with a long red and black face, blue tongue, fangs. You know, nothing short of satanic. Anastasia pictured the painting in Latia's office. At this point, the coincidence between that figure and the one Esmeralda imagined no longer surprised her. Sounds about right. Latia told me if I saw something like that, to run. Well, let's hope we get lucky. We're almost there. Look. They had reached the crest of the ridge. The expanse of land on the other side was no different than the wasteland they had already crossed, except on this side there was what looked like the ruins of a town. The buildings were stone and arranged in streets and lanes that met at right angles. But the buildings were oddly shaped and in various states of disrepair, or repair, as some looked to have incomplete frames of scaffolding around them. But not a single building was complete. The upper levels petered out, the scaffolding missing struts, footboards, or crossbars. The buildings themselves were capped with half-finished rooms missing walls, roofs, even floors. It reminded Anastasia of pictures she had seen of shelled-out towns in Syria or Afghanistan. What is this place? No one has gotten around to naming it. Sort of goes with the spirit of the place, no pun intended, Esmeralda said, her voice flat as she stared down the hill. As they reached the edges of the town, Anastasia saw her first people. They sat in doorways or courtyards, or walked the streets, staring out with expressionless faces. She saw a handful of women and men, walking with baskets on their heads or backs full of rocks. They turned a corner, heading towards some place of construction. They must have just gotten here, Esmeralda said. When people are new, they still want to do things. The last one in the bunch was looking down at his feet so he didn't stumble and didn't see which corner the others had rounded. He looked about, his eyes passing right over Anastasia and Esmeralda. When he could not find his companions, indifference set in. He sat down, lost, given up, staring straight ahead like all the other people they had passed. Farther down the street, Anastasia and Esmeralda came across a man who would walk a few feet in one direction before he would turn around, walk back a few steps in the opposite direction, then turn around again, repeating the process. It made her sad just to watch. Closer now, Anastasia could see that construction on some of the buildings had started numerous times with one type of stone, been abandoned, then started again with a different type. She noticed children's toys, trucks and cars made of wire like she would often see out in the villages, but these too were discarded and unfinished. As they walked towards the center of town, a few people followed them, not unwelcoming, but not welcoming either. Esmeralda tapped her cane ahead of her as if out of habit. She offered tentative hellos and waves. People mumbled back, their eyes darting back and forth as if nervous. Anastasia offered a few greetings as well. Unsure what time of day it was, she dispensed with good morning or good afternoon and offered her own awkward, "Hi." One man went as far as to raise his hand, but then dropped it, looking confused. It reminded her of people with autism who were unable to read social cues. "It's like they have forgotten how to relate," she said. "Some have. Depending on how long they've been here, Esmeralda answered, her voice heavy with sympathy. But they can sense we're different. That's why they are following. Anastasia checked over her shoulder. Esmeralda was right. A crowd had grown behind them, with more people shifting out of alleyways and buildings to join. They were still aimless. They did not speak and showed only the merest hint of curiosity, but the numbers still grew. As they passed more lanes, roads, and intersections, Anastasia realized that the town was quite large, a city almost. Hundreds, even thousands of people lived among the half-finished buildings. The incomplete stories disappeared against the bland sky like fragments of broken dreams. How will we find Paolo? He'll find us, Esmeralda said. We just need to keep walking to the center of town. They did, finally reaching a wide open plaza that stretched the length of many blocks. In any normal town, this was where the market might be. Indeed, some people had begun to set up a few stalls, but without exception, none were finished. Each lacked a wall, a roof, a corner beam or sign, not to mention anything to sell. Esmeralda and Anastasia wandered, a bit aimless themselves, from one corner of the plaza to another, Anastasia following Esmeralda's lead. Esmeralda continued to pass among the people, the colors of her clothes, even her skin more vibrant than anything in the sea of lost souls. Her eyes were deep and expressive, more expressive than Anastasia remembered in the material world. The two of them came upon a group of boys and girls about Paolo's age. As Anastasia studied their faces, she heard her own name. Anastasia? She turned. Amid a group of boys seated against a wall that was half gray and half white with whitewash was Paolo. He looked the same as ever. Anastasia's insides leapt to see his familiar face among all the unfamiliar ones. And yet he was changed. He shared the apathetic look of all the other ghosts, his expression barely registering his surprise as he looked upon his own sister. As Anastasia moved closer, she could see the striking contrast between Paolo's skin and her own. Like all the other ghosts, her brother's flesh was ashy and gray, as if it needed moisturizer or the dust of this parched land had settled on him, staking its claim to his soul. "Paolo!" she cried, taking his hands and pulling him close for a hug. He did not return it, his arms hanging limp at his sides. "Anastasia, what are you—" he started to say, his words coming slowly before his voice trailed off. "Paolo, Esmeralda and I are here to rescue you, to rescue everybody." "Oh, hi, Esmeralda. It's nice," Paolo said, as if noticing her for the first time. The fact that she could move without her cane and that her eyes were open and focused on the world around them made no impression on him. "Paolo, are you all right?" Her brother shrugged. "I guess. I don't really know. It's mostly boring." He kicked a stone. Anastasia looked over to Esmeralda. "This is what it's like for them here," she said. "We were going to start a football game, but it sort of ran out of steam. People wandered away we didn't finish making." Anastasia noticed Paolo looking over at a ball made from rags and twine, but no one had finished tying the knots together or gathering enough rags to make the ball the right size. Nothing finished, not even a sentence. "Paolo, I'm sorry I let you down, but we're going to get you out of here, you and everyone else." "Okay," he said, sitting back down among the other kids who just stared out as if in a trance. The most engaged of them were drawing in the dirt. "That means we're going now, Paolo," Anastasia said, her voice strained with the note of desperation. "Go where again? I'm sorry, I forgot what we were." Paolo blinked his eyes, and a crease formed across his brow for a few moments, before he seemed to forget trying to remember altogether. "We'll just have to take charge," Esmeralda said. "Good news is that they're like sheep. They'll follow. We just need a shepherd." Esmeralda struck the end of her staff against the nearest wall. It let out a series of cracks that echoed back from across the plaza many times over. "Hear ye, hear ye!" Esmeralda called out like a medieval town crier. "Hear ye, hear ye," Anastasia repeated. If things were not so dire, she would have burst out laughing. "It's what I heard in a Shakespeare play once. Or maybe it was Marlowe, I don't know. All those dead white dudes look the same to me." Anastasia tried to pick her words carefully. "Look the same? But Esmeralda, you're blind." "I know, right?" Esmeralda laughed, then dropped her voice lower. "I wonder what their excuse is." She turned her face to the crowd, clearing her throat before she projected her next words, taking a different track this time. "People of Earth, we are here to help you and return you to where you belong." This time, Anastasia did laugh, feeling a surge of affection for Esmeralda as she switched from Elizabethan English to 1950s camp. "If we get out of this alive, I need to hang out with her more." The crowd murmured, more people joining from the side streets and alleyways, shuffling along, slower than Anastasia would have liked, but joining nonetheless. She kept Paolo next to her, his hand in hers. "Where do we belong?" a middle-aged man asked. "Not here," Esmeralda said. "You all are ghosts. Some of you still have living bodies, some of you have died, but this is not your final destination. You need to follow us. We will lead you out of this place, this limbo. Then you can find the path again and know where you belong." A few more nods, a few shrugs. No one seemed to care too much either way, which was why Anastasia was glad when an old woman with gray locks said, "I think she's right. I have never felt like I was supposed to be here. I am supposed to be with my ancestors, and that is not any of you." Another Indian man said, "And I am supposed to be reincarnated to continue the cycle of samsara." "If this is the afterlife, it is pretty boring," a thin old man said. "I don't want to be dead. I don't think," a teenage boy said, but could not complete his sentence. "You might not be dead," Esmeralda encouraged them. "While you are here, some of your bodies are going around as zombies, wreaking havoc on the world. Come with us so we can put a stop to it." Apathetic and forgetful as the ghosts were, they were responsive to whatever idea was placed in their heads. The trickle of a crowd grew into a stream and then a flood. Esmeralda cut a path through their numbers to the front to lead them back the way she and Anastasia had come. But another man cried out, Wait. Are we here in this town for a reason? I can't." "He's right," another woman said, coming to a stop, the people around her stopping as well. "Remember, there's... Oh, what was it?" "That thing," another person said. "Oh, yes," a few people added, while others clicked their tongues and sucked their teeth. Yet still others looked completely lost. "What thing?" "The monster, the one with the red and black face and the white things." The teenage girl speaking curled her fingers in front of her face in the place of fangs. "Teeth?" someone said. "Fangs," said another. People snapped their fingers. "That's right." Others were still lost. "What were we talking about? Why is everyone snapping?" "The monster. It's tall as a tree." "As a mountain." Anastasia felt a tremor in her body. The thing without a name. "It will devour us. We can't leave." The momentum was shifting. People began to sit back down and wander off, but Esmeralda rallied them. No. Anastasia and I have special powers. We can protect you against the unnamed one." "The devourer of souls?" someone asked. "Well, if you want to call him that, maybe we should call him something less scary, like, I don't know, like Shorty McShortface." "He's not short," someone in the crowd called. "Okay, fine, call him Cecil Higginbottoms or Tinkles or Bob, whatever you want, but we won't let him hurt you. Just follow me." The mood shifted again. People were standing upright, gathering once more into groups. Esmeralda held up her staff. The end of it began to glow like a yellow flame in the dim light. The people resumed following. Anastasia pulled Paolo along and came alongside Esmeralda. "Did you know you could do that? Make that light with your staff?" "Nope," she said, giggling as if sharing an inside joke. "But let's go with it. It sure is cool." "What was that about us having superpowers?" "Oh, I made that up. We had to get the people to forget about Bob." "Bob? Really?" Esmeralda turned to look at the lengthening column of refugees. "Hey, it worked." "But Ez, I don't have any superpowers." "We don't know that for sure. I mean, turns out I can light up my staff. Maybe you'll find something about yourself that you didn't know too." I'm fairly certain that I'm pretty ordinary. Well, let's hope we don't need to put that to the test, because Captain Ordinary is pretty lame as superhero names go. But you got this far, Sia. That seems pretty extraordinary to me. She winked and continued on. Again, they walked for what Anastasia knew had to be hours, yet it was impossible to determine how many. The best way for her to measure progress at first was to track the distance between them and the unfinished city of fragments. Its broken-off buildings grew smaller against the horizon, while the marching line of refugees grew longer. Anastasia kept Paolo close beside her. She felt the first stirrings of hope as he started to remember the hours just before he had been bitten and even began to speak complete sentences. The others around them showed similar signs of recovery, speaking to one another, asking questions, and even remembering the names of loved ones they had left behind. But looking back behind them at the long column of people, Anastasia noticed something else. They were walking along a ridge. It grew up out of the floor of the wasteland, a long rising spine with steep drops to either side that became nearly sheer as they climbed higher. It was a perilous path. Treacherous gullies and shadowy ravines formed deep fissures, seemingly without bottom, all around them. Anastasia was not sure when they had started up the ridge, but from the long, narrow line of refugees stretching along its length, she realized they had to have been walking it for a long time. "Esmeralda, is this the way we came?" To quote Shakespeare, Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 3, line 87? No. Then what are we doing? "The way in is always wider than the way out," Esmeralda said, looking back over her shoulder, her head surrounded by an aura from her staff. "All right," Anastasia said. She had learned to just take Esmeralda's word for how things were here in the spirit world. She turned to her brother. "Paolo, do you remember coming to the city?" "Not really. I just sat up and saw there was nothing else around except those buildings on the horizon. They reminded me of broken teeth. I decided to walk over and look closer. It just seemed to be the thing I should—" A woman's scream pierced the air. Esmeralda and Anastasia looked up from Paolo to the crowd. Their faces were turned upward in unmistakable horror. Some were beginning to cower. Anastasia spun back around, pushing Paolo behind her, afraid she already knew what they would see. The shape stood up on the ridge before them, at least 20 meters high. Its features were indistinct in the moving curtains of ether, the red and black panels of his face muted, but the eye slits of the mask flickered brightly with blue flames. Anastasia knew who she was looking at. The nameless one, the devourer of souls. She couldn't really bring herself to call him Bob. With a sound like wood being wrenched to pieces, he opened his mouth to reveal row after row of fangs. As he moved closer, Anastasia could hear his voice, or rather, voices. He spoke not with words, but sounds that were broken, like symbols of words, split off and scrambled from their meaning, whispered all at once by many discordant voices. The noise of the chorus was bereft of any purpose save to inspire terror and sow chaos. He stepped beyond the mists. The bold colors of his face became clear, and so did his body, a moving figure of feathery shadows. The darkness of his skin parted in mouth-like slits. Lesser versions of himself leapt out, lanky figures the size of a Dinka or Maasai man. They landed upon the ground, 1, 2, 3, followed by 3 more. They rushed the crowd, the people surging backwards, grabbing onto one another to keep from falling off the edges. Anastasia wrapped her arms around Paolo, afraid he would be trampled, knocked over the cliffs, or snatched by the demon or his charging minions. But before the minions could reach the people, Esmeralda swept forward, spun her staff, and then did something Anastasia did not expect. Esmeralda closed her eyes. Anastasia was not sure if Esmeralda was sacrificing herself or drawing the minions to her as a distraction, but the careful, balanced poise Anastasia was accustomed to seeing in Esmeralda's posture returned, her back rigid, her free hand out to her side as if to feel the vibrations of the air. Dirt flew up from the minion's talons. Her friend's face was calm, placid even, turning her staff now in a lazy circle like a windmill in a desultory breeze. That was when Anastasia realized that this was Esmeralda's battleground of choice, but she was unafraid to meet the minions in the darkness of her own terms. The minions growled and spat gibberish from behind their masks, their mouths opening with a spray of splinters. Only when they had closed within a meter did Esmeralda's staff accelerate into a blur, swinging down and landing with a crack on the first minion's head. The mask split. A blue light bled out, and his shadowy body evaporated, the remnants falling into a smoking pile of ash. Esmeralda, her eyes still closed, pivoted and struck a second, then a third beast with the same effect. She caught a fourth on the end of her staff and lifted him up overhead, sending him tumbling towards the refugees. Now that they had seen that the minions could be defeated, the grown-ups among them grabbed rocks and stones from the ridge and smashed a minion's mask. Then they began to rush the others. A roar came from the Devourer of Souls, and more minions leapt from his body, all screaming like hyenas. Esmeralda continued to spin, thrust, smash, and kill the smaller demons, knocking some over the side while a group of men, feeling confident, rushed the Devourer himself. It was a grave mistake. The Devourer stepped forward, his foot landing with a crash that shook the ridge. He swept the men up one by one, tearing them limb from limb. Their spirit bodies, for what they were, dropped with dull thuds, while their essences scattered in a white mist to mix with the ether. As quickly as the people had gained confidence, they lost it, cowering once more. Esmeralda dispatched 2 more minions, landing with her staff tucked under one arm, the other out to the side, her palm turned up like the blade of a knife. Now she opened her eyes to look at Anastasia, who had wrapped Paolo in a protective hug amidst the melee. "I've got the babies, but I don't know about their daddy Tinkles," Esmeralda said. "How close are we to the way out?" "It's just up there." Esmeralda heaved another minion into the air off the side of the cliff. Anastasia knew what she had to do. She pulled Paolo close, face to face. "Paolo, whatever happens, you follow Esmeralda. She'll get you home to Mom and Dad. Help the people to follow her." "What are you going to do?" I'm not sure." "Don't leave," he said, grabbing hold of her. "Don't worry, I'll catch up," Anastasia said, peeling his hands away. Paolo let go, his face finally expressive again, even if it was filled with terror. Once free, Anastasia raced up the slope, dodging a minion as it was blasted into bits. When she tripped and fell, she heard the whoosh of Esmeralda's staff passing just over her head and the thud as it landed a strike against another minion. The beast charged again, but Esmeralda caught it in the eye socket with the end of her staff. She cried out, wrenching the mask out of place, and the minion exploded in a blue flash. "Thanks, Ez," Anastasia gasped. "I hope you know what you're doing." "I do too," Anastasia said, using the opening to pick up a rock as she took to her feet again. The Devourer of Souls was descending closer to the people. Anastasia ran into his field of vision and flung the rock at his face. It struck with the hollow sound of a stone hitting a wooden billboard. "Hey, you! You nameless freak! Yeah, you! Over here!" Anastasia bent to pick up another rock and threw it. By this time, the nameless thing had turned, caught the stone, and crushed it, the dust sprinkling down as the creature turned his glowing eyes to her. If she had not been in the spirit world, Anastasia was sure that this was when she would feel pee running down her leg. She had to fight to find her voice and speak over the lump lodged in her throat. "Now that I have your attention, you see anything different about me? Yeah, I'm not a zombie or a ghost. I'm a living girl. I bet that sounds appetizing." It did. The nameless one rushed her, his face filling up her vision. Anastasia turned to run. Knowing she had his attention, she darted for the path she had picked out moments before, crossing the ridge to a spur of rock and balancing along it. She was starting down the mountainside. It took her onto a narrow and precarious slope with sharp drops to either side. Most importantly, it led away from the crest of the ridge and the people there. The mountain shook as the Devourer landed with a heap just behind Anastasia, sending dirt and rocks scattering at her back and her feet. He tore up the ground in pursuit. Anastasia risked a quick glance over her shoulder. He was just behind her, but she also saw that Esmeralda had slain the last of the minions, and the people were surging up the ridge to the way out. Anastasia was too far away to see Paolo clearly. She looked backwards a beat too long, trying to find him in the crush of people. She stumbled, lost her footing, and fell. The first drop was the longest. Anastasia struck the first ledge with such force that it made her cry out as the air was crushed right out of her lungs. She tumbled further, her arms flung out like a dervish, the world a blur, but among the rocks, the white sky, the dust, and flashes of blood, she caught sight of the devourer, descending after her, barreling down the hillside in an avalanche of pebbles and stones. He was a hunter who had caught the scent of his prey, and he was not about to let her slip away. The slope became less sheer, but still Anastasia tumbled down, bouncing off the hillside, each turn feeling like a punch or a kick to the face, the gut, wherever. When her momentum had run out and she was weak with the pain of the impacts and sick from the disorientation of such violent spinning, she continued to crawl forward, the noise of the devourer closing in on her with all the clamor of an earthquake. Her only thought was to lead the nameless thing as far from her brother and all the others as possible. There were copious drops of blood on the ground from her head. Her hands were shredded and raw, the flesh scraped off, leaving bloody prints behind her. Even though she was no longer spinning, her vision was blurred. A ravine, its floor lost in shadow, loomed up to her right. Behind her, she could hear the nameless thing, his claws sweeping up the bloody dirt she left behind into his mouth, his fangs crushing the stones that came along with it. Anastasia rolled closer to the edge, hoping that she might lure him over the side even if she had to go with him. She kept as close to the edge as possible without falling. The sides were steep, and a blanket of ether fog floated in a dense layer. The devourer moved closer, his cry of many voices like a band of harpies. Anastasia turned to double-check how close she was to the edge, but she moved her head too fast. Her inner ear, still disrupted by the previous fall, betrayed her. The world spun anew. She fell. More tumbling, more darkness, more cries of the nameless one descending after her. When Anastasia finally landed, the only reason she was not dead, she was sure, was because she was in the spirit realm already. Maybe she was dead now, and when, if she returned to the path, she would be caught in its upward flow, into the afterlife to be with her ancestors, Jesus, or whatever. The bottom of the ravine was dusty and dark. Anastasia coughed, and 2 blue lights appeared, casting the canyon in a dim glow. The nameless one closed in on her. In addition to the voices without meaning that poured from his gaping maw, she could now hear the flicker of the flames behind his eyes and the rubbing of his blue tongue on the inner sides of his teeth. Anastasia wished she did have some superpower, like Esmeralda had said, but at the moment she knew she was helplessly ordinary. The devourer's breath was foul, like flesh rotting from gangrene or fungus growing over a grave. It was as hot as sewer gas as well, yet her flesh was still covered in goosebumps, as if a wind blew on her from off a glacier. Then, something Latia had said came to her, and in the strange logic of a dream state, Anastasia put her hand up and said, "Wait, let me tell you a story." It was absurd, she knew it, but Latia had talked about the power of story. Dialogue was stronger than chaos, or so Anastasia hoped. Whatever the case, the nameless one stopped, his giant mask hovering a mere arm's length from Anastasia's face. The wind of his breath, in and out, brushed against her cheeks and moved the ends of her hair. He was waiting. "Well, see, let me tell you about how, The wind of breath grew fierce, impatient. He took a great inhalation, like a carnivore before taking the first bite of its kill. "How my friend Latia, she lost her mother, and so her father was so sad, he sent her away to learn at a school on top of a tree, where she became very learned but very lonely, until this one boy, Jamhuri," she spoke quickly, carried now by the momentum of the story Latia had told her before she had fallen asleep, the bedtime story, the very incantation that had brought Anastasia to this strange place. But if she hoped the telling of the story would somehow magically wake her and lead her back to the material world, she was disappointed. For as she neared the end, Anastasia did not feel herself drawn back to the waking world in the slightest. Realizing that her remaining life might be measured out in the tales she wove, Arabian Nights style, Anastasia jumped with little interval into the next story. And although the devourer's face loomed just as close as before, those teeth menacing her, the wind of his breath had grown gentle, the voices quiet, as if the lost souls within his bulk were listening. The fire in his eyes burned brighter, but his tongue had gone still. His whole being was listening, bent on her next words, as Anastasia unwound the telling of her cousin Jambi's story, her journey through the wilderness, up Mount Caliande and back. When Anastasia neared the conclusion, having told of how Jambi had returned in the talons of a lammergeier, she shifted to her own most recent adventure. "You see, I was just talking to Jambi the other day. She had called because she had heard that my brother had been bitten by a zombie, and, well, let me tell you, that was all my fault." Anastasia recounted her own story. Her tone was less of a fireside folk tale and more like an old friend, speaking to her peer about the course of her day. She led the unnamed one through a reconstruction of the events, how she had ignored her brother, the fight in the garden with the American zombie, her talk with Peter, Jambi, and then her passage through the city to Latia's. If Anastasia didn't know better, she would have thought the devourer of souls snorted a small laugh when she mentioned the foolhardy white jogger. "I know, white people," she ventured. The joke seemed to land as the nameless one made a grunt of assent. She continued, sharing as best as she could recall the description of Latia's institute. She sensed that the devourer of souls savored the details, so she relayed all she could remember about the different labs, rooms, and artifacts. Anastasia remembered and repeated what she could from her discussion with Latia, although many of the technical details had been lost on her. She brought the story up to her entry into the spirit realm, waking up in the river, meeting Esmeralda, journeying across the wasteland to the city of fragments, and eventually coming to where she was, lying on her side, propped on her elbow, beads of sweat or blood, maybe both, running down the side of her face with the nameless one hovering over her. "And, well, I guess that brings me to, how we find ourselves here." Anastasia stopped. Her mouth was dry and her jaw ached. A sharp pain stabbed at her elbow from how she had been leaning on it, but she didn't dare shift her weight, lest she create an opening for the devourer to, well, devour her. After the moment of quiet stretched out to a minute, the unnamed one himself shifted, tilting the front of his mask forward even closer. His eyes flared so that Anastasia felt the heat of their rising flames. The whispers grew behind the mask, and for the first time, she understood what they asked. "How does it end?" the voices were asking. Anastasia swallowed. She didn't know. All that came to mind was that dumb saying Latia had said about not knowing anything. Admitting ignorance prepares the soil for the seed of wisdom. Was honesty the best policy? Anastasia had little left to try. I'm sorry, I don't know." A scream split her ears, a cracking and groaning of wood as the mouth opened and the fangs closed on her. Then, nothing. She floated in a pool of darkness, dwarfed to nothingness by the infinity that surrounded her. But in that infinity, she began to perceive order, filaments of substance in a vacuum. In the filaments floated clusters of light, the froth of waves rippling on a sea of dark matter. And in this froth were families of spirals, the pinwheel arms of those spirals made of spinning stars, orbited by their own halos of jeweled planets, each planet a world with mountains, oceans, caverns within continents. The whims of gods, demons, spirits, and ghosts were the forces that conspired to hold these pieces in unity, collaborating, and sometimes disguised as the quantum and relative forces that held all the elements, big and small, together. She heard the drip of water again. Not the quick plink, plink, plonk of before, but this time the slow chime of meltwaters dripping, with long intervals in between, each drop finding home in a subterranean pool. Anastasia opened her eyes. "She's waking up," a familiar voice said. But Anastasia was not on the phone, nor was she in Caliande. "Anastasia, can you hear me?" "Jambi?" she said, blinking, her cousin Jambi's face unexpectedly coming into focus. Jambi was not on Anastasia's phone screen with her room in the background. This time she was right before Anastasia's face. Jambi looked at her, just inches away. She was framed against a backdrop of iridescent ultramarine shot through with veins of silver white. Her hair was still plaited into cornrows of medium thickness, with the wooden beads and cowrie shells that she had worn the last time they had chatted face-to-face on the phone. A necklace with a rainbow array of shiny stones hung around her neck. Its colored stones corresponded to the 7 chakras, each separated from one another by contrasting beads made of rough, polished volcanic rock. The necklace rested against a red t-shirt, where a cartoon bunch of protons and neutrons in a cloud of orbiting electrons was set with an expressive cartoon face, his mouth open as if in mid-sentence. The cartoon atom had legs and arms as well, and he was poised in the animated pose of a storyteller, his arms high above his head, his eyes wide as if he were at the climax of a tall tale. Sans serif letters read out a warning above and below him. "Don't believe atoms. They make up everything." "Hey, Cass." "Jambi, where am I?" "An ice cave," Jambi said slowly, as if trying not to shock her, although at this point Anastasia was quite beyond feeling shocked. It did not keep her from commenting on an apparent contradiction she was sensing in the ice cave. "But it feels warm." "That's because of the pool," Jambi said, offering Anastasia a bowl of water made from the same volcanic stone as the black beads of her necklace. "Drink this. It will help." Drinking strange substances had brought about some equally strange experiences recently for Anastasia, but this offering from Jambi appeared to be simply water. Anastasia brought the bowl to her lips and drank. As she did, she felt an immediate change, vitality returning to her body. The dull aches and sharp pains all over vanished with a wave of relief. Anastasia was able to sit up and take in the rest of the chamber. "Jambi, there is a giant bird behind you," Anastasia said, freezing as a huge yellow and black avian thing stared her down with keen eyes. It looked like a weird mashup of a condor and an eagle, wrapped in yellow and black fur instead of feathers. "Oh, that's just a Kinyi. He's a lammergeier," Jambi said, paying the bird little mind. "He's harmless. Well, mostly." As if dissatisfied with only her passing attention, a Kinyi leapt up onto Jambi's shoulder, nodding his head and picking at the space between her cornrows. She tweaked his beak back. "Stop it! Be a good boy and go tell Aoife that Anastasia is awake." The lammergeier squawked, flapped his wings, and was away in a rush of air, not unlike the first stirrings of a storm. "Jambi, am I dead?" No, you are alive." "Where am I then exactly?" "Well, that is harder to say exactly. You're still technically in Dr. Soleil's office in the capital." Anastasia looked around at the cave, then back at herself. Her arms, legs, hands, torso looked real enough. "But I'm here. Am I a ghost?" "No, you are ascending, a manifestation of your body. You'd be like a ghost, transparent if you stepped outside this cave, but inside here things are different. You'll feel as real here as if you were in the material world." "Are you here? For real?" Anastasia said, clutching her cousin's hand. "Yes," Jambi smiled, amused and compassionate at once. Anastasia looked around again, taking in the pool, the ice that glowed above it with light from some unseen source. The ground was stone but warm. So was the wall behind her. Anastasia jumped, startled, when she saw what was painted on its surface. "It's him," she said, moving close to Jambi. "It's just a painting, I think, but he's nothing to be afraid of," Jambi said, while they both regarded the red-black visage, the fierce blue eyes with black irises, and the gleaming white fangs of the nameless one. The painting loomed close, as if to devour Anastasia once more. "You met him?" Jambi asked, curious. Yeah, you could say that," Anastasia said, touching her forehead. The wounds were gone. Jambi, what the heck is happening? Better she explains, her cousin replied, nodding for Anastasia to look back in the direction of the pool. Anastasia braced for something terrible, but in this case she was relieved. A woman was walking over to them. She was statuesque, regal, and beautiful. Her skin was a dark ebony, and the curves of her figure were hugged by a wrap of burgundy with blue patterns throughout. Black and white bangles decorated her arms, and a leather choker held a sapphire over her throat like a blue star. She was walking across the pool, Jesus-like, rings of ripples spreading out from where her feet touched the surface of the water. Welcome, Anastasia. I am Eva. Anastasia bowed her head. Everything about the woman's appearance bespoke that she was someone, something more than she appeared. A kidney, the lammergeier, flapped back into place next to Jambi, and she fed him a few seeds she pulled from her pocket. Tell me, Anastasia, what do you remember? Eva asked, still standing miraculously on the surface of the water. Jambi, for her part, was unperturbed by this, as if it was natural and normal that mysterious, beautiful women hung out in ice caves and walked on water all the time. I just remember that thing, Anastasia said, tipping her head to the wall but stopping short of looking into the face of the devourer again. She did not want to meet the eyes of the demon or turn her back to this woman whom she was certain was a goddess of some type. I thought it was dead. A fair conclusion, as the Nameless One is the source of death, destruction, and chaos. But then why am I here? Is everyone safe? Paolo, Esmeralda, the others? They are all on their way home, each and every one of them, Eva said. Anastasia could have wept with joy and relief. It didn't occur to her to ask if she would be joining them. She assumed she would find out where she was headed soon enough. Perhaps this cave was just a stopping point on the way to the afterlife, and Jambi's reassurances that she was not dead needed to be qualified by a yet. On reflection, Anastasia realized she was at peace with such an outcome. It was enough that Paolo, Esmeralda, and the refugees were safe. You all right, Sia? Yeah, more than all right, she said, wiping some tears and repeating herself. More than all right. She took a few moments to compose herself, Akinyi even moving in close to tap Anastasia gently on the head with his beak, as if in reassurance. She found herself petting the bird, his feathers as soft as fur on a cat's neck. I just don't know what happened. I'm so confused. I was too. I still am. You learn to get used to it, Jambi said. Perhaps I can help, Eva offered, her lips curving into a smile. Yes, of course, my lady, Anastasia said. You've been a wise and courageous young woman, showing heart, quick wits, and selflessness. In short, Anastasia, you have grown. Thank you, my lady, Anastasia said, although she wasn't sure how much she had grown. The choices she had made felt less like choices than imperatives. There had been little choice at all when faced with the peril of her loved ones. The balance of things has been disturbed and still has not yet been put back into its rightful place completely. But the greatest part of the work has been done by releasing the ghosts of the zombies from limbo. The outbreak will end, but the original wound has yet to be healed. The fabric of the cosmos still bleeds. Eva paused. A drip of water chimed into the pool. Her eyes darted to the spreading ripples. The task of that healing will also fall to you, Anastasia. Anastasia stiffened. Jambi rubbed her back. It will be fine. You can handle it. Is it him, my lady? Anastasia asked, inclining her head at the cave painting, but still not looking at the unnamed one. Is he tearing things apart? Can't you destroy him? Eva's lips parted in a kind smile that displayed her own bright, white teeth. I would not destroy him any sooner than I would destroy myself. He is me. Anastasia was confused again. Jambi read it on her face. I know. Just roll with it. Just listen, her cousin said. Eva continued. He is the other side of me. While I can sustain life, growing it and nurturing it, I cannot create it. He is the life spark that sets the universe in motion, and with the power to create life comes the power to end it too. One requires the other. I bring things together, he shakes them up. I am order, he is chaos. I am the garden, he is the gardener. Without both of us, there would be no life, no death, no movement, only stasis. Anastasia looked over to Jambi again, who shrugged. They like to speak in metaphors. It's a little hard to follow, but it's the best you'll get. They're gods, after all, completely transcendent. If we totally understood them, well, we can't, 'cause our heads would explode. Literally? Pretty much. Anastasia would take metaphors over her head exploding any day. Aoife had crossed the water, stepped onto the ground, and settled down next to the two of them, casual-like, just chillin'. A goddess with two girls, one real, one ascending, whatever that was. Roll with it. Totally normal, Anastasia tried to tell herself. Your guide, Latia, has learned much, and she has taught you well in a short time. You managed to succeed despite great odds, Aoife said. Anastasia knew praise when she heard it, and thanked Aoife again. Your time here grows short, and like I said, you have one task left to accomplish before all is set right, so listen to my next words with care.